Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us tonight to Basics of Board Service. I'm Karen Thompson, the Director of Operations at Grow and Lead, and I want to welcome our members tonight and our non-members and our not yet members. If you're not familiar with us that much yet, we are a nonprofit that serves other nonprofits. And one of the services that we provide is the annual UP Nonprofit Conference in October. And so this year we kind of turned that on its head and said, let's take all the topics that we normally talk about and create a webinar series. So tonight is the first night of that series, and we're going to be talking about governance and board basics. I want to thank our sponsor for this evening's webinar, which is First Bank Investment Management Group. So thank you very much to Tom Humphrey and his crew there. And our presenter tonight is our own Victoria Leonhardt. She's been an associate at Grow and Lead for almost 10 years. She has her CNP credential from Nonprofit Leadership Alliance. And she has served on many, many boards since she was 16 years old in high school. So she has been a board member, and she has also provided consulting services to boards that we work with. So thank you again for attending, and I'm going to turn it over to Victoria.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm really excited. Like Karen said, I've spent a lot of time on boards, with boards. I'm a staff member at a nonprofit, so I work under an executive director who's hired by our board. So all kinds of experience with boards. So I wanted to give everyone a little overview of some Zoom features that we'll be using tonight before we jump in. First off, there is a Q&A box in your bottom tray. I'll ask that you type your questions that you'd like answered during the Q&A time at the end of the session into that box. There's also the chat box where you can connect with other participants, and we'll have a Let's Chat kind of part of the presentation where I'll prompt you with a question to put your answer in that box. And so that's where you'll put it. I won't be reading through the chat during the presentation. We have a lot to cover. So I'll let Karen and Amy kind of manage that. I will only be looking at the Q&A box when we get to the question and answer portion of tonight. So I just wanted to let everyone know that so that they're not putting things in areas where I won't notice them. And I will try to answer every question. If we don't have time for me to answer them live tonight, I will follow up with an email if your name is provided when you do the question and answer. So if we aren't able to answer it tonight, we're going to cover a lot. I will follow up with you and get those things answered. All right. Let's get rolling. All right, so you should all see my screen here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the objectives we'll be learning tonight. First of all, understanding the legal duties you have as a board member. That was something I know I didn't really realize when I first started serving on a board, was that there are some things legally that you need to be doing. We'll look at the different structures of boards. We'll look at the roles that board members have in the boardroom, outside of the boardroom, the different hats you wear, and we'll check in on how COVID-19 has impacted board service. So if you've been along for our Board 101 or Board 102 sessions, some of this may sound familiar, but I tried to add in a little bit of new information to keep everyone on their toes. So my first question is, who is here? So I will have the poll launch to get a feel for who is attending tonight. So your options are you a board member, an executive director, CEO, a staff member, another volunteer that's not a board member, none of the above, or you're watching as a group? We'll give everyone a few minutes, not minutes, seconds, about a minute.
About half of the people have completed.
Awesome. You guys are paying attention. I love it. Thank you. Look at those numbers. Awesome.
Okay. And
all right.
that's
That
just about good. Everybody. A couple more seconds and I'll close the poll and share the results.
All right, look at that. So we've got a lot of board members here. So when I'm talking today, I'll primarily talk from the board member perspective, but I will interject with a little bit of staff and executive director roles and how you may view things as we move through. But lots of board members here. Awesome. So, to those of you that are board members, thank you for your service. It's really the highest level of volunteerism that you can do in a nonprofit. You are the single most important body in your nonprofit organization. And we really want to stress that word body, right? The board acts as an entity that makes legally and socially responsible decisions. And those decisions are to be good stewards of resources. So financial resources, physical resources, the things that your organization has, we're making decisions to be good stewards of those things. We're also acting on behalf of others. There is no one individual owner of a nonprofit. The board represents the community that is served by the organization, and they are making sure that they set a mission that is meeting a need, and the programs and services that they provide fulfill that mission. So when we look at those legal responsibilities that you have, first off, we have duty of care. Now, duty of care is the level of competence that is expected of a board member that is ordinary and prudent. So people under similar circumstances would make a similar prudent decision in the boardroom. You want to exercise reasonable care and be engaged, attend board meetings, pay attention, read materials, ask questions if you're unsure about something. Be active, informed, and independent. Then we have our duty of loyalty. So this is the standard of faithfulness. Board members give undivided allegiance when making decisions affecting the organizations. A board member can never use the information that they learn as a board member for personal gain. You must have the best interest of the organization at the forefront. You may be familiar with, hopefully have signed a conflict of interest policy. This is the legal area that the conflict of interest policy falls into. If there is any doubt as to how the conflict of interest is handled, it should be in the policy, the steps that you follow, and there should be board minutes and discussion captured as to how that conflict was handled. And finally, we have our duty of obedience. This is acting in accordance with the mission. You need to make sure everything your organization is doing is consistent with the central goal. The public trust has been given to you to manage funds to fulfill that mission. You want to make sure that you're following things like your articles of incorporation, bylaws, tax exempt filing status, things like that are very important when looking at apologies, just said my internet was unstable. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're fine, Vic.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry about that. So this is where the confidentiality comes into play. If a board is something like a school board or a government board, there may be things like the Open Meetings Act that you're required to operate under. In that case, you would move into closed session for a confidential matter. Boards that invite staff or public that are nonprofits and don't fall under Open Meetings Act operate in that way too. So making sure that you're following all of the laws, filing all of your reports, using the money in a lawful way. That is all duty of obedience. So there are 10 basic responsibilities of the board of directors. First off is determining the mission and purpose. It's the board's responsibility to make the mission statement. So if you're one of our newer startup organizations, you know that you've been working on your mission. If you're a legacy board that's been around for a really long time, those founding board members are the ones that came up with that mission. So that's a really interesting little thing that all boards are responsible for. If you are in the place to hire a staff person, the board selects that chief executive or executive director. I'll use those terms interchangeably, but it is the highest ranking paid staff member that reports directly to the board. And so the board's job is to develop that job description and make sure that the most qualified individual fills that. Then we have supporting and evaluating the chief executive, right? It's not just hiring them and letting them run off. It's making sure that resources are in place and there is meaningful feedback being provided. Then we have ensuring effective planning. Boards need to be active in the long-term planning and goal setting of their organization. Monitor and strengthening programs and services is number 5. Making sure board members are aware of the programs and services that are offered and what outcomes they're providing. Are they meeting the outcomes that they thought the program would, or is it time to evaluate if that is something that should continue? Ensuring adequate financial resources. Fund development, in the end, is the responsibility of the board. Protect assets and provide proper financial oversight. This is developing the annual budget, ensuring financial controls are in place to avoid embezzlement and fraud. Build a competent board. Ensure that legal and ethical integrity is there, and enhance the organization's public standing. And these 10 responsibilities of the board come to us via BoardSource. Their website is boardsource.org, and there is a whole lot more information about these 10 things. If you're interested in digging real deep, it's a really good website to check out. So we're on to poll number 2, and I'd like to know how many of these 10 things is your organization doing? Now, I understand some of you may not have hired staff, and so that's why I put percentages instead of numbers. So some of you could be out of 10, some of you could be out of 8 if you don't have staff. So take a minute and think about that. I will back this up so you can see all of them.
The votes are slowly coming in. We're almost at 50% of voting. We're at 70. Couple more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
All right, so we've got a really good spread. People are doing some of the 10 things, maybe a little bit we've got to work on, but it looks like a lot of boards are at least familiar with what their responsibilities are as board members. That's awesome. So how do these 10 responsibilities get done? That would be the work of the board. And I broke these down into a few different categories. So some of you actually may recognize committees that do this work. Some of you may recognize policies that do this work, and we'll get into how your board is structured in a few minutes. But these are kind of the work that gets done. So first we have board operations. This is making sure that you are recruiting and orienting new board members, assessing your performance through either self-assessments or working with a consultant, and making sure that everyone knows and understands your board structure. I've been a part of a board where some people were working board and some people were or felt we were a governing board, and there was just a little bit of tension. So making sure you're having those talks about this is the structure we're using, and making sure everyone understands how your board operates. Next, we have strategic planning. So strategic planning is taking the organization's mission and looking at the purpose and goals for a little bit longer term, right? So we're talking 3 to 5 years, planning for that future and staying true to the mission. The board should be driving this process and partnering with the executive director moving it forward. It should not be the executive director telling the board which direction the organization should go. The board plays an active role in this process. Then we have resource development, financial, human, and physical. So like we talked about, that fund development falls in there. Human resources is hiring that leadership position, executive director, CEO, however you refer to it. And also physical, right? If an organization purchases a building, the board owns that building as an entity, right? Because we don't have one person that would own it. The executive director does not own the property. The board as a unit owns the property. So all of those things are the resources that the board is responsible to come up with and make sure are in place. And then finally, oversight. Again, financial, program, and legal oversight. So looking at the financial oversight, making sure that the money is there, that it is being used in the way that we said we're going to use it. It's moving the mission forward. From the program lens, again, making sure that the programs and services are accomplishing what they're supposed to and they're succeeding. And then from the legal standpoint, like we talked about, in duty of obedience, just making sure that those forms are being filed on behalf of the board, like your 990 or your annual report. We're here in Michigan. So the state of Michigan has an annual report you need to be filing. And then finally, making sure that in that oversight, you're not micromanaging, right? So it's hard to micromanage and provide oversight at the same time. So boards are looking at it from that overarching big view, making sure that things are getting done from the bird's eye view as it relates to the mission. Yes, and finally, ambassadorship. So this is my favorite one, and that's being an advocate for the mission, making sure that you are out being loud and proud that you're involved, right? Like I hate going into work with a board and realizing someone that I know really well is on the board and they've never talked about it. And like, wait, what are you doing here? Like share, go present on behalf of your organization to service clubs or attend an outreach event with staff, share social media posts. Those are all ways that you can be out advocating for your mission. And it's a way to make sure that, or offer the opportunity to, if they want to, former board members can stay involved, right? Like as we act as ambassadors, if you have a really great board member and you have term limits, it doesn't mean that they have to go step all the way away from your organization. Instead, through ambassadorship, we can keep them engaged and involved. All right, we are going to shift gears a little bit to talking about the 3 hats you can wear as a board member. First off, we have the governance hat. So remember when we talked about the board being an entity and working together? When you have your governance hat on, you are the board. You are being the authority, the ones governing the organization. You are making decisions while in a quorum. A quorum is defined in your bylaws as how many people need to be present to vote on things that need board action. So this is a very formal in the board meeting hat that you wear as a board member. The next is implementation. This is not necessarily worn by every board member, but it's given to a member that may be the chair of a committee or a task force. So a little bit outside of the boardroom, they still have authority. I think of an event planning committee, and there may be a board member, if you're all volunteer, that does have the authority to lock in the contract with the venue on behalf of the board as part of that committee structure. So that would be the implementation hat. They're not in the board meeting making the decision. They're making the decision outside with board authority in a very specific setting. And then the last one is the one that we wear the most often, the volunteer hat. So this is when you have no authority, but you are helping on behalf of the organization. So the story that that I like to share, because we've all been in this situation, and I was the bad board member, right? I've been in doing something and it's like, well, I'm a board member, so I will just do it right now because I'm a board member and it's my responsibility, even though I'm acting in a volunteer role. That's not something that you want to do. When you're a volunteer, you're like any other volunteer that is at the event or program, whatever you're doing. And you don't need to raise your hand and be like, well, I'm on the board and so we're going to do it this way. That authority you only have in that formal setting where you have a quorum and are acting as a unit. So I just like to remind everyone of that. I know I am guilty of using my board member status outside of the boardroom, and it's something that I have been working on. So if you do that, just be cognizant of it. That takes us into structures. So when are board members wearing these hats? Do all board members wear all these hats? There are really three structures and three ways that we can lay it out. So the first is the working board. So the working board is really common in smaller nonprofits, also in our startups, regardless of size, because there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put into place and built before we're ready to move to a governing or institutional model. So in this level, the board is setting the policy, the budget, vision, strategy, those 10 things we talked about as a board at the top. But then in the middle, at the management level, depending on how many resources you have and where you're at in the process, you may have a CEO and management doing managerial, or you may have board members as committee members or committee chairs providing some of that management. And then again, at the technical level, right, we could have staff and volunteers, but we could also have board members that are filling those volunteer roles. So the big thing to watch out for in the working board structure is burnout, because the same people can be filling a number of layers of the things that are happening within the organization. Next up, we have the governing board structure. So this is for an organization that's grown a little bit. They may have a number of staff that are able to do managerial and tactical work, but the board is still really engaged. They're setting the vision and strategy for the organization. They also have strategic committees that guide the vision and strategies that the staff are carrying out. The board also sets limitation on budget and policies, and the staff are working within those limitations in partnership with the strategic committees to move the mission forward. And the last one is the institutional board. So you may have heard of this one referred to as Carver model or policy governance. You'll see this in really big institutions, right? University boards, some school boards, co-op type organizations. And in this structure, we have the board setting limitations and staff doing everything that is not related to the vision. The vision is the only thing the board is working on. They set the vision, they make sure that staff are operating within those policies, but they have very few committees. They do very little managerial and tactical work. And you see them, like I said, large organizations, academia, like 50 plus staff members is what we're looking at for this type model. So another poll. Where's your board at? What structure do you see your board utilizing?
People are responding quickly. There'll just be a couple more seconds here and we should be ready to go. I'll count us down. About 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
All right, so not surprised. We have a lot of working boards, a lot of governing boards, and a few institutional boards. And when I think of size of the nonprofits here in the Upper Peninsula, that is what I expected. So, and I should mention that you don't have to stay with that structure forever, right? As you grow and mature, you can move to the next or move up. Same thing, if things, if you really need to get hands-on with your agency, you can move back to a different structure. So you don't have to be with the structure that you use forever. If you want to be more hands-on and everyone on the board agrees, there's consensus, you can move back to a working board. If you are a working board, and everyone is on the same page and you have staff now because you've grown, you can move up to that governing board. And if you're governing board and things are going really good and it's okay for the board to step back a little bit, you can move up to that institutional board. All right. So now the division of responsibilities. I think this is the most popular slide of this presentation. And it really looks at what does the board talk about in the board meeting? And this is for organizations with staff members. I should preface it like that. So for organizations with staff members, what is the board looking at and what does staff take responsibility for? So again, if you look at that board side, we're looking at end results. What happened and why did it happen? How much, how well? We're looking at really high mission, vision, goals, policies, and we use that method of voting to find consensus. On the staff side, it's a little more in the weeds. We're looking at the means of achieving that vision. How, when, where, who is doing it? What are the strategies, the assignments? Is it documented? And for large decisions, staff makes recommendations to the board, right? And so the one critical thing across the bottom is that bar of trust. The board needs to trust the executive director who hires the rest of the staff. And the executive director, CEO, needs to trust the board. Without that, things can get ugly, right? So if trust is an issue in your organization, that is something that you want to dig to the root of and figure out why that is. And again, I want to remind everyone, this is the whole board asking those questions, not just one individual. So again, acting as a unit. Now, a question I always get is, well, okay, I am the vice chair. What do I do? I'm the secretary. What do I do? And honestly, that's not something that I can tell you. It's in your bylaws. So the information in your bylaws will likely lay out for every officer position what the responsibilities are. That being said, I've looked at a lot of bylaws. And there are things that are common across all of them. That does not mean that in your organization, this is something that that position does, but if it doesn't, it could be a question that you have discussion around, right? So common things that the chair does is act as the leader of the board. They oversee the meetings. They work as the point person for the CEO. They assist with preparing the board agenda. They coordinate the CEO's performance evaluation, and they can act as spokesperson as authorized on behalf of the board. The vice chair is next in line. So they perform all of the duties of the chair if the chair is unavailable. And then this is something that I really like, is giving the board orientation process to the vice chair, because you can see if we don't do that, they just fill in for the chair. So this gives them a responsibility and allows them to really get to know new board members that may need a little more help in learning where and how the organization fits in the nonprofit sector, in the community, what the programs are that they offer. So I like giving that job to the vice chair. You may use president and vice president too. Those are kind of interchangeable. So those are the first two. We have the secretary, who's the record keeper of your organization. They make sure board records are taken either by themselves or by a staff member. They provide notice of board meetings, and they're third in line in the event that both the chair and vice chair are unavailable. And then finally, the treasurer. So they're the money person. They need to understand financial statements, specifically if nonprofit financial statements, if possible. But you can learn if you have basic knowledge of financial statements, nonprofit financial statements specifically. They can serve as the finance committee chair. They can present the budget to the board. They may oversee the entire audit process as the board representative, and they're going to look at those financial policies and responsibilities and make sure that they're up to date and the board is aware of them and abiding by them. So those are some of our common leadership responsibilities. Now we're going to talk a little bit about COVID-19, right? Like, it's a weird time to be a board member. It's really weird. So back in August, we did a survey and found out that boards are still meeting, which is awesome, right? There are still needs in our community, so we do still need to meet. And we're meeting virtually, and we're being engaged and proactive board members in these virtual meetings. Board members are also taking a more active role in advocating on behalf of their nonprofit. So that could be things like assisting with the PPP or EIDL grant process, or loans that are coming up in your area, making sure that the nonprofits are taking advantage of all of the resources that are being brought forward, and making sure the awareness is there on what they're eligible for. So this crisis has allowed some boards to thrive in a new digitally based way, but I know that's not the case for everyone. So this is our Let's Chat session, where we're going to use that chat box. And if you want to share, you can type in your name, location, and biggest challenge. Make sure on that to button, you're sending it to panelists and attendees. And I'll read a few of them out loud. If you see someone with a challenge that your board has already solved, reach out. And if you see a board with a similar challenge, connect, right? Because there's no playbook for operating a nonprofit in a pandemic. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to share, and I am actually going to type mine in right now because I am on a board and we're having an attendance issue. And one of the things we realized is that it's easy to lose track of time after work. We're meeting in the evenings. It's just really, start making dinner, and the next thing you know, the board meeting's over and you missed it. So that has been a challenge for us. All right, and we're gonna put this in the chat box. So I sent mine, I hope you all can see it. And it looks like, oh, more attendance, yep. Growing and recruiting board members, yeah, it's definitely a challenge right now. Yes, kind of having to shift your priorities to immediate needs instead of looking at some of our long-term needs, definitely. Engaging discussions during the meeting. Oh my goodness, Amy, I have that challenge with my board too. As board chair, I find that I do a lot of talking and no one else does. So I feel that one. More distraction during a meeting. That is absolutely something I have noticed. Yep, more on engagement with virtual meetings and email. All right, so I don't have the magic answer to engaging your board virtually because, like I said, that's something that I've struggled with as a chair of an all-volunteer nonprofit. Another one, yeah, the kind of changes in income and that one big event. Oh, and I'm familiar with your big event. I love going to it. So yeah, that's hard when it's the one big thing that you do. All right, well, continue to put your things in and feel free to connect with each other. In the chat box, you are able to pick a specific person to send a message to. So if you see someone who has said something, like I said, if your organization has had the opportunity to overcome that challenge, feel free to share. If your organization is having a similar challenge, feel free to connect. Yeah, it's a weird time. So some things that we can do as individuals to try to lead by example as we deal with these challenges. First up, this is great because, like I said, a lot of people have this challenge. Attend and actively participate in meetings, special events, including virtual special events, right, etc. Being a good board member, leading by example, being the one that is there when attendance is low and being engaged and involved in discussion, taking the opportunity to see some of the programs that are being delivered by your organization, possibly virtually, and that maybe you couldn't see in person. Definitely, that's a really interesting way that we're able to participate now that we may not have been able to participate previously. Come prepared for the board meetings. Don't wait until you're at the in the meeting to read the previous meeting minutes or the agenda or the financial reports. Take some time, familiarize yourself with the materials. Make sure that you are ready and not scrambling, and that word distracted came up. it can be distracting to try to read through your board packet as the board meeting is going on, right? So be prepared, review all of your materials, be ready. Think strategically and generatively, especially now as we're kind of getting into some of these new challenges. Reflect on things like what attributed to the success or outcome of our program or event, and how can it be replicated? Not how much are we going to, or how much did we spend on the fundraising t-shirt? Were they $5 cost or $3 cost? That's not a conversation that we want to be having right now as we're thinking really big picture. That's a great committee discussion. That's a great staff discussion. But at the board level, we really want to be thinking forward right now. Again, speaking up to legal or ethical concerns. If there are things coming up that don't feel right, your job as a board member is to question them and make sure that you are doing your due diligence and operating in a way that is legal and that you're proud of, right? Serve as an ambassador, be able to give your elevator statement, know your mission, get out there and share what you can about your organization. Make a financial contribution at least once a year. This is, for some organizations, a really powerful statistic to share on things like grant applications with their donors, because it shows that the board members are bought in. If you say we have 100% board giving, I know all of your board members believe in your cause because they give to it, right? I didn't say all board members give $100. If you have a youth on your board, that could be a $5 donation. Or if I'm a big fan of having the people that you serve represented on your board. And if you're serving people that need a little help, right? Something like a $5 donation is huge. So making sure if you do ask for that financial contribution from a board member, that you're asking for it. You're not telling them that it needs to be large, right? I believe we use meaningful at our organization, and what's meaningful for one person compared to another person is completely different. And then finally, identify and help solicit new donors and members, board members, members to your organization, whatever that might be. I'd say that's probably one of the hardest things is as a staff member, right? I have a network. My network is very different than the board members network. And there might be someone in a board members network that I want to know. I want to get on our donor list. I think they would make a great volunteer. Using that board member to open doors and make connections as a board member, actively opening doors and making connections is really important, and a way that you can really help bring people into the fold and make sure that the organization's top of mind, people are aware of your programs and they're being asked to get involved. Because when people aren't asked, people don't give, people don't participate. They need to be asked. So tips, tricks, and ideas. First up, effective orientations. Like I said, great job to give to the vice chair. There are some fantastic resources on BoardSource, who I mentioned earlier, on crafting your orientation. Having your mission typed at all of the agendas, and I'm going to add, and reading it at the start of the board meeting. That helps as people are making, especially really hard decisions, having that mission right there. I know I've done this before when we're talking about, is this something we really want to do? Let's bring it back to the mission. The mission is this. Does it align with this? If yes, we should consider discussing it further. If no, we need to stop talking about it and move on, right? Mission moments. These are really powerful. This is collecting something from a board member, volunteer, or staff member that happened in the last month that can be read at the beginning of the meeting to remind everyone why we're there. What is our mission doing? How are we bettering the lives of people, animals, whatever it is that you're doing, making sure that the board members know. And then it's when they're out being ambassadors as a board member, when I hear that mission moment, I can tell it to my friends at coffee when we're able to go get coffee again, right? So having those stories shared at every board meeting is a great way to really make ambassadorship easy. Conduct meeting evaluations. For those of us that are struggling with attendance and engagement, meeting evaluations can help figure out why that is happening, right? One of the things the board I'm on is looking at is 6 p.m. on a weeknight really feasible in the current conditions because children are home and things are just a little more hectic. People are at their computers all day, asking them to come back to their computer. Is that why attendance is low? So we're looking at that. And then discuss trainings and areas to improve. If there's something your board is really struggling with, especially in those like top 10 responsibilities, it could be worthwhile to watch a video, have someone come in and talk to your board, do an activity to build trust, all different things that you can do if you are having some issues on your board that training can really help, because sometimes it's lack of awareness, right? Especially around fundraising. Sometimes people don't know that, fundraising is something boards are responsible for, making sure the funds are there. So making sure as board members go on and off the board that everyone knows what they're responsible for, training, areas to improve, great way to make sure that they are aware. And finally, we have some tools that we can help with. As many of you are Grow and Lead members, some of these are no cost. If you're not a member, we can still talk with you and help find, like I said, Board Source is a great place. We also do in-person things like strategic planning, board development. We can help do evaluation of executive director. One of my favorite tools is that recruiting tracking grid that's bullet point number 5. Also known as a board matrix. It's fantastic. That kind of mixes with the composition analysis. The one I like, it has both, like people you're recruiting and people you already have. So you can kind of get a really great view of where you're at. Again, making an orientation agenda. I know Amy has shared our orientation book with a number of nonprofits, and it's a really awesome binder that we put together for our incoming board members. And then again, that evaluation of both board meetings and board members. Our board members at Grow and Lead evaluate the board, I believe it's every other year, via a survey, and they've found some things that they need to work on too, right? Because no board is perfect. We're always trying to be better. So evaluation is a great way to do that. All right, and perfect. I was aiming for 15 minutes. We have 11 minutes, but we'll hopefully get through some of the questions. So Karen, I'm going to pop my video back on so you can all see me as you stumped me. What do we have for Q&A?
Well, one of the questions that we have from our friend Liz is one of the slides says, quote, assist in preparing agendas for the board meetings, end quote. If the chair assists, who's responsible? I would think the chair is, but this language sounds like someone else is. So preparing the board meeting agendas.
Yeah, so a lot of times the board chair may not, especially in organizations with staff members, may not have a full idea of everything that needs to be covered in the board meeting. So board chair and executive director or highest ranking staff person get together and build that agenda together. I know some board chairs and executive directors may go out for lunch and do this, right? Like you can get together and have an opportunity to see each other and write this. The organization I'm board chair of, we do have a very part-time staff member that works 10 hours a week managing our program. So she's not a full executive director, but she is a program manager. And her and I do it collaboratively in Google Docs. So that I put in the things that I want on there. She puts in the things that she has that needs to be addressed. And then we go through and kind of put it into the agenda form. So whoever, I guess, is on the ground and has knowledge of things that the board may need to address would be the other person that would work in tandem to get that agenda done.
Thank you. We don't have any other questions right now, but please use that Q&A box. And Liz says, thanks for your answer, V. We meet in person or virtually to go over what needs to be discussed. But I see it as my suggestions to the chair and the chair sets it.
Awesome.
Again, feel free to use the Q&A box to pose your questions for Victoria, and we'll get those answered.
While people are coming up with their questions, I will talk a little bit about the member mastermind coming up next week. For those of you who are Grow and Lead members, I hope that you're able to join us, especially if you haven't been on a mastermind yet. Our masterminds are networking calls where we discuss wins and challenges around a specific topic. And so board governance is going to be the January topic, as this month is dedicated to boards. So those things we talked about or typed in, I guess, during Let's Chat, we can dig into some of those during this hour if you're able to join and want to talk about those things. So I'm really excited for the session because, even every time I present this, I feel like I learned something. So talking with other board members and other nonprofit staff and executive directors about this topic, who knows where the conversation will go, right? So you can register at glcyd.org on the Nonprofit Conference Recalibrated page. And we do check membership. If you aren't a member, you can go to glcyd.org and join. We would love to have a lot of people there. I don't know if we talked about breaking up if we have a very large group into smaller groups, but we could do that. Yeah, it's going to be a really, really great discussion. And I'm really excited for it.
And I'll just add, we use the Zoom meeting structure, so it's much more open and interactive for everybody. Okay, I have not seen this word before. There's a question, is there such a thing as board entropy? Is that how you say it? ENTROPY.
That sounds right. And if I remember correctly, it kind of means kind of like downward, maybe as people are on the board longer or board exists longer, we see more disengagement. Disintegration. Yes. So one of the things that I really encourage people to explore is board terms, right? So I've heard people say, I've had a board member who has been on our board for 40 years, which is wonderful that they have that much passion for your organization. But when we talk about burnout and stagnation, not having term limits and having people who have been on for a very long time can be the cause of some of those issues. We've also seen boards that I think the community can kind of see this organization has been around forever. And so they just kind of forget about it, right? If they're not out and championing their cause, and that can cause some other issues as well. So yes, there are all kinds of reasons why boards can gradually decline. And that's why it's so important to do those evaluations, those board self-evaluations, and identify if things are getting off the rails, and then examine how can we get them back on and make sure that our boards are strong and that we have the best organizations that we can.
We've had a question about, can you go into a little more depth about the board's duty to ensure there are enough funds? My board does not always demonstrate their clear understanding of this, and then it feels like it falls on my shoulders as an executive director.
I am so glad this question was asked, because I have been in this situation where I was on a board of an organization that we did have to dissolve because of that, right? It was kind of a passive board, and some things happened with the executive director leaving, and there wasn't enough funding to have a staff person in place, and it just kind of, it didn't work out. And in the end, that fell back on the board, right? If the executive director leaves, who's left? It's the board, right? You can't just be like, you can be like, we're not going to be the board anymore, and the organization goes away. So yes, it's a hard thing, and boards can give power to staff to be the ones that are out raising the money. Absolutely. That is something that happens all the time. It's completely acceptable. But in the end, if something bad does happen, things go south, it's the board that's on the hook, not the staff members. So that legal responsibility falls to the board. And I can share more with that person via email.
Excellent. We just had a comment that this is excellent. Thank you. I don't see any other questions being
Karen?
posed. Yes.
This is Amy. I apologize for butting in, but the question about the fundraising made me think some of the time it's easier as an executive director. Some of the time with your board, you feel like you're trying to manage your boss, so to speak, and it can be a delicate situation. So if there's a touchy situation, or if there's just general training or a discussion that you would like to have brought before your board, but you don't necessarily want to deliver the message, Grow and Lead, we're here for you with that as well. We can help facilitate discussions or provide training or whatnot.
Thanks, Amy.
All right. Well, for those of you that come up with questions afterwards, I know we covered so much information. If things do bubble up, my email address is on the screen. You're more than welcome to send me an email. And you can also connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. That is our handle at glcyd.org for all three of those sites. And we will send out the slides and the recording of this presentation. It will be hosted on YouTube. So if you subscribe to our channel, you'll get the notification right away. If not, you'll get the link in the email after it's completely uploaded and ready to go. Thank you so much for spending your Tuesday evening with us. This was so much fun. I really appreciate you all being here.